All right, we're live again with Wellness Unfiltered and another special guest who I've had the pleasure of interviewing previously on the Between the Before and After podcast. And I loved her story so much that I thought it would be really helpful to bring her back onto this discussion where we're breaking down a lot of the things that are wrong with the way that we practice medicine and healthcare and the way that we kind of miss looking at the person as a whole. And I thought it's rather than us just bad ideas back and forth, let's talk to somebody who's had some serious experience in this realm. So we're welcoming Christine Handy, who is not only a cancer survivor, a mother, a model, a master's student at Harvard, a published author, a motivational speaker, and probably some other accolades that I might be forgetting, but I think that's a pretty good start.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so probably it's helpful to dive into one of the biggest experiences you have. We'll just like dive straight into this. We chatted more about sort of the emotional and psychological side of the cancer journey on Between the Before and After, but one of the things we didn't really have time to touch on is the actual, like, could we say, like, the mechanics of the journey, going through traversing like the American medical system as a patient like this. And I think prior to the diagnosis, I mean, did you really have any idea what you were in for when this gets landed on your plate?
Absolutely not. I did not have any contemporaries that had ever been diagnosed with cancer. My mom's best friend, who was obviously 25 years older, died of breast cancer, and that was my only measure. And so when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I said to the doctor that called me on the phone and said, "You have breast cancer." I asked him one question, which was, "Am I going to die?" And he didn't even answer. And so he just said, "I need you to come tonight at 5 o'clock with your husband to talk about this." And I was like, "I'm never going to make that meeting." And I asked my husband, who I'm long story, we're not together anymore, but I said to him, "Can you please go for me and just take notes?" And he said, "No, this is not my cancer. It's your cancer. You're coming with me." And I was like, "I'm not going." I was so scared. So it was like that moment. And then like the first month, I was like a total blur. And because I had just had my arm fused from another health issue, the bone grafts and the cadaver bones would have dissolved with chemotherapy. So they couldn't start chemo for 30 days because they had to postpone it in order to preserve what my arm doctors had just done. So here I was faced with breast cancer. I couldn't move on with a protocol because of this situation. And I really had no idea what was going to happen or how I was going to get through it, especially because I had so many other issues going on at the same time. I was like, how am I going to I can't drive. I couldn't drive at the time because I had a huge cast on my arm, and I couldn't move my arm because the grafts needed to place themselves in a certain place, and it couldn't move it. So like my arm was constantly on my chest, I held it like a baby because I didn't want the grafts to move, because if they moved, I'd have to have another surgery. So between caring for my arm and trying to care for my young children and trying to go to figure out chemotherapy and postponement, I couldn't even sleep at night. It was so crazy. There was too much happening, too much going on at the same time.
I think I'm just still stuck on the fact that the doctor called you on the phone to give you this news. I think this is, a good point of entry to talking about care in the medical community, because the fact that somebody's willing to deliver that kind of information in an impersonal manner, such as a phone call, I think is an unpleasant statement about the way things are. And I'm not blaming the doctor. I mean, there's probably a reason why that was how it was done, but I can't think the doctor felt great about having to do that way either.
Well, interestingly enough, when he called, first of all, it was hard for me to physically pick up the phone because I was in this massive cast. It was from my fingertips to my shoulder.
Yeah.
And I was in a robe because I couldn't dress myself. So I was waiting for my husband to get home from wherever he was. I didn't know where he was. And I'm waiting to have him get me dressed. And I see my phone like vibrating on my bed. And I go over and I'm like tentatively walking over to my bed going, "Please God, no, please God, no." And here was this unknown number, and I pick it up and I'm shaking, right? And it was this very meek voice. Like, it wasn't this like strong man who's like, "Hey, you're tough. We're going to get through this." It was like this meek little man who had this small voice who was just like, "You have an aggressive form of breast cancer." And I was like, "That's it? Like, how about I'm sorry? How about this sucks? Something. Nothing.
That's really, when I think about that, maybe we could put it this way: how might you have preferred to receive? Like, obviously, it's hard enough to deliver that message. And someone else I recently was interviewing, we were talking about grief and how to have a conversation with somebody about grief. And this is a place where I think grief is going to be a powerful, felt emotion. How might be an appropriate way to try to deliver like this incredibly difficult diagnosis?
Life-changing. Yeah, I have a great idea. If you have a spouse, if this person has a spouse, they should call that spouse. And then they should plan with the spouse to come into the office without alarming the patient. Just say, hey, you know what? We're going to go through those results. We're going to go into his office, right? But to cold call me and say, this is what you have, and I need to see you at 5:00 tonight. And by the way, it's 8 a.m. So now you have 8 hours to ruminate of this in your head by yourself. That's the other thing. I think that they should find a way, before they say anything, or if they have to say it on the phone, are you with somebody? Like, that would be a good start. Because if you're not, say, you know what, I don't have the results yet, but I'm going to call you back later. Can you have somebody with you? And even though that's a little white lie, because they do have the results, it's better than somebody. I mean, I'll never forget that phone call by myself.
Of course not. I mean, I think it speaks to how the medical industry how the medical industry teaches patients. There, I said teaches again, didn't I? Treats patients. Because the reality is they're not treating you like a person. They're treating you like a thing, an object or a problem to solve. And so they take the compassion out, because the compassionate response, the like human response would to be, to say, are you alone? Do you have somebody you can come in with? Like, hey, we need to discuss something. Is there something you need? That would be the compassionate medical response, right? I think we've lost her.
Yeah, well, because compassion is kind of in my wheelhouse, and it's a big component of what I do. I wonder. So I'm trying to ponder, like, why is the compassion missing? And I wonder if from a medical, so let's say like from this doctor's perspective here, you're back. You temporarily froze. The question that I'm asking is, why is the compassion missing? And I wonder if from the perspective of the medical practitioner, a big portion of their practice, or significant enough that it's notable, is trying to deliver this sort of news to people on a regular basis. Like, that has to take an emotional toll on the individual. And so I wonder if they try to emotionally divorce themselves from everything altogether, which is why the compassion is missing, because of a fear of like, I'm not sure that I can handle being the deliverer of this news on a routine basis.
Well, unfortunately,
I can speak to that.
They don't want to sorry, go ahead.
No, please, go. Yeah, please.
I was just going to say, I think also part of the problem is they don't want to give false hope when they can't say for sure if somebody's going to be okay. Because I also think, unfortunately, a big part is they're looking at the potential for being sued for promising something they can't promise, which I'm not backing them. There should still be compassion there, but I think there's a lot of doctors who don't have the emotional intelligence to add in compassion without saying something that might give false hope.
I think I hate to do it so early in the call, but I think it's this idea of us versus them. If this doctor's livelihood and situation feels threatened, he's going to prioritize keeping himself safe or herself safe versus the client need, right? Or the patient need. And I think that's a really big problem. Like, we can't have people who are in this situation delivering really desperate news or, communicating really important information feeling personally threatened, right? That's not a great way to start a relationship that relies heavily on trust.
Well, I can speak to both of those things. One, I think that in the medical industry, they need to teach emotional intelligence, which they don't. The second thing that I think that they need to do is, I understand the detachment, right?
Uh-oh.
Yes. And when she comes back,
Okay. Sorry. I don't know what's happening. Because I have all bars on my computer. I don't know why it's happening. I do think that, so for me, because I've had so much trauma, I've been very detached from everybody. Like I can get up in front of 10,000 people because that's my job, is to be a professional speaker and tell my story of horrendous pain and not shed a tear and not even show any emotion, which, by the way, some of my speaker agencies think that's a bad thing. They think I should try to fake a tear or two. But I've literally detached myself. And I can see from a medical perspective, if you're telling women or men, whomever, children or parents that their child has cancer, or that the person has cancer, you'd have to detach for your own emotional sake, right? But there is a difference between detaching and compassion. You can have both. Because I know that because I have that. I have an incredible compassion for people, but I'm incredibly detached. But they're not teaching that, right? And I think that's where they're going wrong.
Well, I wonder if maybe in this situation, because the doctor, like, you're not necessarily looking for the highest EQ or emotional intelligence in a medical provider. You're looking for the best, most skilled medical provider. And so this is, in one sense, maybe not necessarily top priority or in their wheelhouse. So I don't think there's a position called this, but what about, like a position within a facility, which is like deliverer of news? You wouldn't maybe call it that, but
genius. It's a genius idea.
Or at least somebody,
that needs to happen.
Yeah, sitting with the doctor in the room, because I think you can't detach the two services either. I think if you tried to do that, you'd be in trouble, because you're going to have technical questions. You're going to have, outcome questions and all of that.
This is such life-changing news. I think they should send somebody to their house. Like, we're not talking about, you have a cold. We're talking about you may not live at all. You may die. So I think it's worthy of somebody driving over instead of using a phone. That mentality, I don't understand it.
That was the most, there were lots of really traumatic things that you described, but the thing I found the most traumatic was the fact that somebody didn't take enough time and care to handle you and your, emotional state appropriately, because that can have a huge impact on your recovery as well. Let's be honest. I have a client story that he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and he nicknamed the first doctor he spoke to Dr. Doom, because the guy just literally told him there was no hope, forget it. And he's on year 4 now of surviving it. And had he not had the inner strength, the personal strength to go and seek out a second opinion, he would have taken what that doctor said and taken it as a death sentence and not gone on to find the person who did actually help him. So I think there is a lot of responsibility here, and having another role is a great idea for this. It's how you make that a thing, or what kind of training that involves, I think is a pretty involved process. But the fact that your story is not unique, at least even in my practice as a coach, I hear these stories. It tells me that there's more of a systematic failing. Which is why we're here, right? This is what we're talking about.
You're absolutely right.
But I think it's a really, really sad thing when we are such an advanced society, and we can't do an adequate job of taking care of people who really need it.
Yeah.
Well, think about like mental health professionals. This is their wheelhouse, right? And they deal with this on a regular basis, and part of their skill set, part of their education, part of their learning is going to be around, as coaches, we already hear difficult enough stories from our clients, and we understand that we're not in the role of mental health professional, but we also can't ignore the fact that the reason clients are coming to us for help is very rarely just because, well, I want to look a little bit better. But somebody in that role, like they have, I believe, the capacity to handle news like this, to be able to handle the people's reactions and so on. They're trained in that way to be able to do this without necessarily taking all of it on personally and letting it become like this tremendous burden. And so I love the idea of having, two professionals in the room where it's like, you have someone on the EQ side and someone on the technical side. And now you're definitely not alone in this.
I think it really speaks back to this idea that there needs to be more of a care team rather than a specialist approach. And we talked about this on a previous live stream that, there's been a really big shift away from the generalist to there's one family doctor, everybody went to him or her and they knew you well. And so they were better able to sort of have a feel for what might be happening. And then they would refer you on. And the generalist has really lost a lot of traction, at least here in America. I'm not sure about in Canada, but they're hard to find and they're not very easy to get in to see because they're booked out because there aren't very many, because it's more lucrative to be a specialist. But you get what you get, it's like they're extremely good at this narrow field. That's what being a specialist is. And so they don't have these extra skills that they need, the rounded out version of being a doctor that's missing. So what does that care team look like? Who should be on that team?
Yeah, I was going to say that too, a care team, more collaborative. But then the problem, especially here in America, is what would that cost? And then insurance, and then you have that whole cycle of.
I think you could argue that it would probably eventually cost less because you'd be able to go more on a preventive side rather than oops, everything is awful already and now I have to fix it, versus if you have somebody who's already your caregiver and you go and see them no matter what because, you've got a weird skin issue or you've got some digestive issue and you go in and they can take care of that initially. You don't wait so long to go get your annual checks. You don't wait so long to take care of an issue.
Right.
And it's a clear pathway, right? I think this is something we've talked about a lot before too, is there's no clear pathway to care. Did you feel once you got that diagnosis that you knew exactly what the next steps were?
Well, it's interesting because I think it's so dependent on the physician. So for instance, the doctor who messed up my arm, he destroyed my arm, right? He did that level of care, although he was the best doctor in Dallas and he went to Stanford and he had all these accolades, he destroyed my arm. But when I walked in to see my oncologist, and by the way, after that, I didn't trust any doctors. And so when I went to meet my oncologist for the first time, I was like, I don't even want to go in the room because I don't trust him. And immediately he said to me, I walked in and he goes, "Oh, you're the girl with the arm." And he diffused all of that angst that I had. And he was on my team the whole time. He knew, he was like, "How's the arm doing?" He, spoke to my arm doctor in New York several times and they were kind of collaboratively treating me for cancer. Not my arm. My arm doctor wasn't treating me for cancer, but he was trying to save the bone grafts. And so I think it depends on the doctor, the personality and how they care for you. So going back to your question, when he was caring for me, I knew exactly what was going to happen because I trusted him and there was no confusion. When the arm doctor was caring for me, it was confusion all the time. And I ultimately didn't trust him, but because he was doing things that were wrong and it was confusing to me and I couldn't understand it because he was telling me one thing, but what was happening was something different. And so you have all that confusion and you're going, well, wait, he is the medical doctor and I'm supposed to obey authority. And he did go get his medical degree and I didn't. So I'm supposed to trust him. But when things are chaotic and you go, I don't trust him. And then he tells you that don't question his authority. Then you feel shame and then you back off, right? That's that's how we do, especially women. And so when I ultimately saw a second opinion for my arm was totally destroyed. And that doctor I trusted because he was like, what he did was wrong. You have people that show compassion, they change the trajectory of your health. Because if somebody is saying to you, I understand you've been in pain and I hear you and I'm listening and I'm going to make it right, your hope, your mental state changes. So what do you have? You have endorphins that are helping you versus all this all this stuff going into your lymphatic system that's hurting you from stress. So just the doctor alone can change your life. It's picking the right doctor. And how do you do that? I don't know. I've picked terrible doctors and I've picked great doctors. But I think one of the standards should be when somebody walks into his doctor's office is there compassion and is there not? And if I don't walk into a doctor's office that has compassion, I will walk out and politely walk out because I've seen the difference.
So then I wonder if we look at a systematic reason why some of this occurs, like why a doctor's like, I'm the authority, you can't question it. is this like a defensive stance in place because, like, in particular, the U.S. is such a litigious society that they're trying to put up this sort of wall of protection around that?
I actually think it goes back a lot farther than that. I think that it's if you look again, here I go with the anthropology again. I just can't stop, can I? But like, if we go back a little bit farther, like we had much stricter roles of authority and respect even 100 years ago than we have now. And the doctor has always been an incredibly revered position in society.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And so you have this, they're not godlike, but they have this sort of apart from others perception that's been in society for hundreds of years now, because they were almost magicians, you know, what they were doing. And even there was a lot of pushback on initial science and study of physiology. You know, you can read all about that as well. And so when you look at how that's been set up through generations of people, it's one of the most challenging relationships to question. For that reason, because generationally, really, these people have had all of the authority. Yeah. And for the first time, I think really that's getting called into question, and they're very uncomfortable with it because they came up in the same system we did, which means they believe that they also have, you know, this knowledge base that nobody else has. And it's very affronting when somebody tells you that you happen to be an actual expert in something, and somebody tells you don't know what you're doing. How can you not respond with that, with, you know, some kind of shaming response? Yeah. And so I think it's
no, I totally agree with you. And I'll give it one step further. I think pride and ego gets in the way with these doctors.
For sure.
Like when I walked in and said, this doesn't look right to me, in the nicest way possible, he wrote in his notes that I was a hysterical housewife. I never shed a tear in his office. And he wrote in his notes that I was all these things. And because we went to court. Like, he destroyed my arm. We went to court. By the way, we won for malicious malpractice. He's bullying me. And he lost. But it was because his pride and his ego, I was threatening his pride and his ego. And that goes back to self-esteem. Oh, like if 100%. If he had a strong self-esteem, he'd be like, okay, go see a second opinion. I'm good with that. Why? Because I'm secure in who I am, and I'm secure in in my work. But if you threaten that, and you have a guy here who thinks he's a god, and his self-esteem is so kind of, you know, temporal, based on accolades, then that's dynamite. And that's what I went through with this doctor.
That's a real shame. I'm sorry you had that experience. I mean, I don't think your story is, you know, unfortunately, I don't think it's unique. But that's the thing,
it's not unique. It's not
unique. And I think you saw like all of our reactions when you said that. We all were like, oh my God, like the thought of being like, you're a hysterical housewife.
Yeah.
There's so much.
I'll give you one more.
Yeah.
I'll give you one more. So he ordered a blood test. At the very beginning, when my arm was looking like there was something else going on, he ordered a blood test and he buried it. I had an infection in my arm that was brewing for 7 months. He buried the blood test. He hid it so that he couldn't get in trouble. Like a child. Like a 5-year-old does that. He hides his toy that he wasn't supposed to use, and he put it away in the closet so his mom doesn't find out. The doctor hid this report that said I had an infection.
I think it's such a shame.
My attorney.
Go ahead. Sorry, your attorney.
Oh, it's disgusting. All my attorney had to do was subpoena Quest Diagnostics, and they go, here's the report. And it's like, what is the guy thinking? But he's like a backyard bully in the backyard in high school, going, oh, you're not gonna question my authority. Really? I'm just trying to save my arm. Gotta be kidding me. So it's messed up.
Well, and I think it's, again, I always like to look at it from different lenses, right? And we look at it from the interpersonal interaction that we're describing now, and there's problems there. But if we back up 1 or 2 steps, like, how did he get to that place? Why is he so afraid? Why is he so vulnerable in that role? And okay, maybe it's a litigious society, but again, I was warned 1,000 times over as a personal trainer that I'd better always have amazing insurance, because at some point I will definitely get sued. I can't tell you the number of trainers that said to me, like, someone's going to sue you. And I was like, but I'm just going to do my best. And, I'm going to do a really quality job, and it's going to be okay. I do have insurance. I'm not saying I don't carry insurance, but it's like this idea that the inevitability of getting sued is out there. And it doesn't matter how you behave. And I think that's really dangerous, because I do think we need to have these things in place where we have, have recourse when we've been mistreated. But on the other hand, if you have an entire system that's functioning around preventing people from suing each other, that's not good either. And somebody made a comment I saw pop up about the Google, there's a slippery slope of Google educated people. Oh, it was John. Right. And I think this is the retaliation or the response to this inability to communicate effectively with the medical professions. Right. You don't start looking outside of the revered, respected experts if you feel like you're having good communication with them.
So I look at like the approach that I take with my clients, for example. So I say to my clients, we are two experts collaborating. Now, what I mean by that is, like, I bring my expertise in nutrition and behavioral psychology, but they're bringing their expertise in terms of their own human and life experience. And so when they come to me with questions, or they say, I'm not sure about this thing that you shared with me, or whatever, that's them sharing from their experience. And so this idea of, like, I think it's powerful that we have, Google and this massive trove of information at our fingertips, so that we can go to our professionals and ask better questions and be advocates for our care. It shouldn't be seen as a threat to the medical profession that we, in one sense, you could say we basically have access to the same information. We don't have the same lens of expertise to look through the I'm not an oncologist, but I can still access the same information he does or she does, and from there bring an educated question. And so this speaks to the need of becoming like our own best advocates.
We should be our own best advocates, but it's scary because those doctors have a lot of power. In the medical industry, in the legal industry, they protect doctors. They don't protect patients. So when I decided to sue this doctor, when I decided to sue this doctor, he had barely any insurance, and he did that for a reason, because nobody could take it from him, But I wasn't doing it for money. Fortunately, I was able to afford all the surgeries and everything that I went through. I was doing it so he wouldn't do it to somebody else. But when you go up against a doctor in the legal system, now I sued him, I was going through chemotherapy. I walked into court, I had no hair. Like I had a cast on my arm. And so he looked over at me and he laughed, because when he had first seen me in his office, I was like this beautiful model. And now I was suffering from cancer, had no hair. And he looked over and he was like, he made fun of me. And so I just think the legal, and you know what? We won, but we barely won. It was a very hard road. And our case was so egregious. That man was so obvious. I had so much proof, and we barely won because the legal system protects the doctors.
Growing up in Canada, we used to, as kids, we didn't know a whole lot, and we didn't have the internet back then. I'm sort of aging myself as well, but we would hear that 70% of the world's lawyers reside in the U.S. I don't know if that's factually correct to this day.
Sure, yeah.
But that's the way that we thought about it, because as kids we used to joke about, like, we could sue our parents for like disciplining us or something. That was the ideas that we had in our head. If we lived down there and there's all these lawyers, we could sue our parents because blah blah blah. But it's this idea, like, I think the U.S. in particular is more litigious than any other society around the world, partly connected to money. And so you wonder, well, why does it look like, why do they protect medical profession more than the individual patient? Because it's like, follow the money.
No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because there have been so many egregious lawsuits of people who've just sued doctors for the tiniest things, who used to win.
Fair enough.
And so they overcorrected, and now their patient used to.
I think she's trying to say they overcorrected, and now they're protecting doctors rather than patients.
Yeah, the pendulum swung a bit too far.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to the foundational problem that you've monetized something that's a fundamental right, and you've created situations where people are suing because they can't cover their medical bills, right? So again, step back away from the system, one more lens, one more, grade, and you can see it. I mean, if you're somebody who had a surgery and it didn't go quite to plan, and you didn't regain your job afterwards, and you're left with a huge amount of medical debt, what's your option? It's bankruptcy or sue the doctor. And so when you put people, and you see this with cars and car insurance as well, because of the way car insurance works in America, it's another situation where, they're not insuring you anymore because they're not willing to pay out when the time comes. And so you're seeing the same thing happening with medical insurance, which means that you're not actually paying for anything when you're paying for your insurance, right? And these are the bigger systems problems that create these unfortunate experiences for people, where she goes in and this guy who should have been out of practice, it sounds like long ago, is still able to practice and get away with it. And God knows what his staff was saying about him. She could not have been the only person having issues. So he was getting protected from multiple angles, right? So, there's always a few bad apples, but it's like when you start realizing the whole tree is rotten, you better look at the roots. It's like something's up with the roots, and the roots are, people can't cover their medical bills.
Right. Well, he has to be one of the worst. But then when we look at like doctors who, they're human. So we expect some mistakes, some errors. So they should be able to also state that when they made a mistake. So if he made a mistake with her arm, he should have, if he wasn't the way he is as a person, but he should have been able to admit that he made a mistake and then move forward from there.
But if it's not safe, you're not in an environment where it's safe to admit your mistake because it could cost you your practice. You're not going to do that. Nobody's going to put themselves in that position, right? So I think, and it's interesting because my husband's just had a second collarbone surgery. He had a motorcycle accident and he powdered his collarbone. Just like so many pieces. It was impossible to see that there was still a bone in there. And we found this emergency surgeon, and he did a really excellent job, right? And he came out. I remember when I was in the waiting room and he came out to tell me, how it had gone. And he was like, well, it was much worse than the x-ray looked. He said, but I'm pretty proud of myself because I'm pretty sure that sucker's going to hang together. Not in exactly those words, but that was very much the gist. Right. And so, fast forward a year and a half, my husband's done all the PT. He's done all the things he was supposed to do. And the bone didn't quite heal all the way through, even though it was plated. So he's had to have the surgery repeated. We went back to the same surgeon, and this time this guy literally went to all of his peers and said, okay, here's what's happened. I really want this to be fixed. What can I throw at this? And he came back to us multiple times. He called us and said, okay, well, we've got this strategy and we've got this strategy. And I think we need to do 6 of these things. What do you think about that? And he was so amazingly communicative about it.
This is the piece that is missing. I think that's what we want to address in our discussions around deep health, is this idea that you can be human in the course of care, but also that you can communicate with other professionals and treat the person as a whole, as opposed to this series of discrete parts. Christine, I wonder if in your experience, for example, you were treated as an arm. And really, maybe all of us have this thought in the back of our mind, like this doctor sounds like he's probably, on the sociopathic or even psychopathic spectrum, or, it's like there's something wrong here. But I was on a panel discussion yesterday, and we were talking about the term narcissist came up because I think it gets bandied about a little too much now, a little too easily, because there's a psychiatric disorder. But so I was looking at what are the stats. And in the general population, it's less than 0.5%, right? It's not nearly as prevalent as we would think it is. But on the same token, you look at certain professions and you say this profession or this profession attracts more highly these types of individuals. And so I wonder if the medical profession attracts those who have a certain need for status, prestige, gratification, that kind of thing.
Certainly within surgeons, right? Surgeons for sure. Yeah. I think that's pretty well documented. There's some pretty good research out on that.
I don't know if any of you were a fan of Scrubs back in the day, but there's Dr. Cox. He was a doctor, and he called the surgeons scalpel jockeys.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I had breast cancer and I had implants after my mastectomies, I went to see plastic surgeons, right? Well, plastic surgeons can be very narcissistic, because when you come out of plastic surgery, when you take your breasts off and then you put, implants in, they're like, oh, this needs to be moved a half an inch here, and this needs to be tucked in here. And you end up having 3 or 4 surgeries for reconstruction because they're like, let's tweak this. And the truth is, the medical field, plastic surgeons in particular, it's a business.
Yeah.
Every single time they go in to tweak something, they're getting paid thousands of dollars. It's their business. If they don't do surgeries, they're not making any money. And so looking back, it's so easy for me to go, you know what? I should have just left that one alone, left it after, you know what I mean? But they're telling you, no, we have to do this now. I'm like, okay, you're the doctor.
Yeah.
But it's my body. I wasn't an advocate for myself back then.
But how can you advocate for yourself when you're so emotionally worn down from all of these other experiences too? And I think that's the really tricky area, right? Because that's why you need to be able to trust your doctor, is because you're not going to be, it's like somebody in shock. You don't ask them whether they should go to the hospital or not. You take them to the hospital because they are in shock, you know? So
thinking of like, the cost, you know, because the cost of medical care is significant, right? And in the US, it's got to be like higher than anywhere else in the world. And there's a systematic issue there. So it's funny, it's easy for us in a roundtable discussion to sort of put, well, we should do this or we should do this, you know. But of course, the reality of the situation might not be quite so cut and dry. But I wonder, is there space in a system like this for like a type of patient advocate, which might be the deliverer of news? So essentially, you almost got like a case manager, like somebody who will direct you to this professional or this one, but they're like their job is to take you on and be an advocate for you, because as Chris, you mentioned, like when you're in this emotionally depleted state, going through chemotherapy, going through surgeries, your body's being, for lack of a better term, mutilated in a sense, like you're losing parts of your identity. Like it's got to be immensely like disconcerting to like lose pieces of you and your identity and all of this. And so to have someone there who can be like a stable emotional anchor for you, I think would be invaluable in this experience.
I think it comes back to this treating the person as the whole again, though, because we often talk about mental health, and it's so much more commonly talked about today than it's been ever before. It's the idea that mental health is just as important as physical health. And, you know, we're collaborating on building this deep health model. And it's this idea that like, you can't just look at people as if they're an arm or a leg or a breast or any of these individual body parts, because whatever you're doing to that part, you're doing to the rest of the person. So like, how do we get mental health professionals into hospitals in higher volumes where they're able to just go and work with the patients that are there? Because even if you stay overnight, if you've ever stayed overnight one single night in a hospital, it's like, it's a lot. Okay. Like it's a lot of things going on and it's scary, and you can be completely left alone with that, with no support. And the nurses are overburdened most of the time. Even in other countries, like my overnight hospital stays weren't all in America. And I can say the nurses did their best, but they've got however many other patients they have to go see as well. So how we insert these caretakers or these case managers into the system has to be sort of like, that's your case manager for whatever doctor you go see, not just because you went to this facility.
Right.
I think they can't be linked to the facility. They have to be linked to the person.
To the system.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder though, like, because we can probably argue for this, because the biggest argument against maybe adding elements of this to the system is cost. And you come back to this, like you're always going to be in this battle against how much is this going to cost. If you can demonstrate that by adding this element to the system, overall the cost of healthcare is going to decrease, you're probably going to, you know, but in the US, you have this for-profit medical system. That's the kicker, right? Because it's like, well, if you decrease costs, you're decreasing money going into the system. You know, I have a friend who's a brain surgeon, and I think he's paid $1,800 an hour. Yeah. Like, now, he's a brain surgeon, and there's like... He's a brain surgeon, but like $1,800 an hour. So yeah, of course he wants to work, because every hour he works, he makes what some people make in 2 weeks or a month.
Yeah, I think it's all very necessary. I have a friend who tried to start doing this very thing, because what you need is an advocate for you. Because like, take my situation as an example. I had a colon problem, I had an arm problem, and a cancer problem. So if the arm doctor is not talking to the cancer doctor, who's not talking to the colon doctor, it's madness. And none of it makes sense. If you have an advocate who's like, okay, here's colon, here's her paperwork for her colon. This is what happened. Here's her arm situation. Here's the cancer situation. We have to have it all collectively together so we understand all of this, so we don't have these problems going forward. If you don't have somebody like that, the hand's not talking to it's like, it doesn't work. So, but she tried to do this very thing, and it failed, because the medical people, they don't want it, because It is going to be cost effective in the end. And the insurance companies do want it, but they're not willing to do the studies on it. And so right now it's like they're not doing anything, but it has to happen at some point.
Do we need to take a nuclear bomb to the system?
I mean,
Well,
you know,
so
periodically,
broken.
this is what happens, right? Like, look at society. Periodically, you know, societies sort of unravel themselves because there's a buildup of it's, you know, it's a buildup of
But-
all sorts of things that were solutions at the time that seemed like good solutions. But
Yeah.
when you start like glomming them onto each other, you get this thing that just doesn't work. And sometimes starting over is easier or better, or, you know.
Depends on how you start over, though. That's
Exactly.
the
And I
key.
think
That's the
this
key.
is the part we haven't done very well yet, right?
Exactly.
It's like we can't
We're so
seem to start
reactive.
over
We're
in a
too
civilized way. Yeah.
we're too reactive. Instead of being methodical about this stuff, we're so reactive as a culture, as a community, right? I mean, look at COVID. Everybody's been reactive. It's been fear-based, but it's not logical. So you have people who are not being diagnosed with cancer. They're being they're being diagnosed with late-stage cancer because they've shut down the testing centers, right? In the beginning. And so you have more people dying from cancer now than ever because of COVID, when
Because you're not catching it. Yeah.
they're not catching it, and they're scaring people to go to the facilities that could catch it. And so it's broken, it's wrong, and it's all fear-based. And that's where I get frustrated, because we can't have a medical system that's fear-based. We have to. And the other thing is, I'm getting my master's at Harvard, and I'm in the journalism literature program. The journalists that studied 30 years ago, they had these very stringent rules about what was truth, what was able to be shown on the media because it was fact-checked, versus now, which has gone completely off the window. They're not even teaching it anymore. So the ethics involved in all of the media is gone. And you can see that. And so you have like a CNN who's very much to the right, and or wherever left, and then you have another one that's very much to the left. And so you're not having people that are just giving the facts. It's all like my opinion. We can't have people's opinion. That has to be the facts.
Yeah,
right?
the opinions come next, right? You need the facts first. Then you get to have the opinions and the hypotheses, right?
Yeah, people can make opinions after they see the facts, but if the facts aren't being shown because you're just seeing the reporter's opinion, that's skewing the whole process.
It's changing the relationship too. It's changing what you look to journalists for.
Oh,
right.
Yes.
And they're now in a completely different position in society than they should be, because the role
they're now in a power position.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly the problem.
They're not just feeding the information. They're now like doctors, where they're like, I'm powerful, I'm in control, and I'm in charge, and I'm going to tell you what I think. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's well documentedly dangerous too, right? It's the freedom of the press is a really important thing. And we often talk about it from the perspective of the press should be free to speak the truth, right? But what's happened is the press has been freed to say whatever they want, which was not the intent.
Their opinion, which is different.
Yeah.
So then maybe I could take a giant, as a Canadian, a giant deep dive into like conspiracy territory or something like that. If you look at a whole, where, again, it comes back to follow the money. If you think about the media, what you have is now, for example, billionaires who own media outlets and then fund educational grants or things like that. And then they say, well, so of course, journalists are going to put forward stories that suit whatever slant that these. So we have this accumulation of wealth, and you could sort of maybe argue the same thing when it comes to the medical system. The dysfunction we see there is you look at where the funding dollars are coming from, who's paying for this. One of the popular targets of conspiracy theories is good old Mr. Gates there. And I don't have any sort of theories about him, but what you could say is like, so he's invested heavily in certain medical technologies through his foundation. And so because of that, and then he's invested heavily in media outlets as well. So because of that, he can use the media to advocate for certain medical practices as well. And it's not to say that maybe he is altruistic. I don't know the guy. But you look at that and you think the potential for conflict there is enormous, because he wields this, his wealth has doubled since he left Microsoft. So I'm picking on him. I'm sure he's got thick skin and can take it, and I'm a nobody. But the point being that you have this massive amount of power because of funding and where that funding is being directed, and the narratives then being controlled, whether it's the medical or the media.
Right. I mean,
it's definitely going, again, when you look at whenever the concentration of power, aka in this case money, is in the hands of a small group, it doesn't matter what they do with that money. It's never going to appear good to anyone or to everyone.
Fair enough.
Right? There's always going to be sort of like, he could be the most altruistic person in the world and his motives could be absolutely pure. And then the effect of whatever he chooses to do could totally suck. And he was just wrong because he's one person. And I think this is where the root of the problem is when we're looking at one person. And you can take Elon Musk, you can take any of these billionaires now, they're still human beings. And the reality is they also make mistakes, whether their intentions were good, bad, or otherwise. Like having all of that money and power in the hands of very few leads us down these roads very quickly. And it's again, historically repetitive that we see this. So it's a matter of like, when do we learn this lesson and how do we get to a place where we can change it nonviolently?
No, you said that so well. And let me expand on it just a little bit. But if we take people like Elon Musk or the Twitter guy, what's his name?
He's stepped down, but Jack Dorsey.
He's Jack Dorsey, right? And he becomes the authority on certain subjects. He's just a really smart guy. He's not an authority in the medical world. He's not an authority in the political world. But people see him and he's a billionaire, and then they revere him and they idolize him, and they take his opinion, which is what it is. It's his opinion, and they take that as a fact, and it's not. And so that's where it gets all confused, because Bill Gates may be a really great guy, but he's not an authority on COVID. But his opinion,
or toilets in Africa, because that's his big thing too, like. But his opinion, he messed that up pretty royally, by the way.
Yeah.
But his opinion is revered as like he's an authority. He's not an authority.
No, he's got a lot of money, and he was really.
He's got a lot of money, and so people are listening to him because he's got a lot of money. But let's just call a spade a spade. The guy's rich. That's it. He's not an authority.
We're confounding these traits, right? We're deciding that rich equals smart, equals powerful, equals able to influence things. And I think this is, if you really look at the root of it, as long as we perpetuate this ideal of like social hierarchy, we're going to have the same problems over and over again.
Communism is the answer.
That's not what I said.
It's gotten so much worse because people's wealth has gotten so great.
Yeah.
Well, a select few.
Out of control.
So technology has allowed the concentration of wealth, and that again creates this problem, because then you're turning to these sources of wealth saying, will you be the altruist that helps us fix our broken medical system, for example? Or, and we haven't even really in one sense touched on like the natural health, or we call it natural health, and like, which, like, why isn't it just health? But, this element of the puzzle, it's not even a part of it. And like Caitlin, I think, for example, you talk to people on a regular basis who are just being like failed at every single level socioeconomically, and all you want to do is like be able to help them, but they're, we can even go, it starts to like the food they're consuming. Like by the time they get to the medical system, they're so screwed up.
Yeah, and then they're just told, like, for example, you have IBS, which basically means, I don't know what the fuck's going on.
Totally. IBS is like
the most blanket diagnosis.
Like fibromyalgia, too. That's another favorite. Or lupus. The number of people who walk out with lupus, and people are like, what do I do with that? But I think
I'll take this pill, and I'll continue to eat, bullshit. And,
right.
It's okay.
It's and I think it's this idea of balance, because we talk about all of the power and wealth being concentrated into the very few. Like nature doesn't function this way. Our bodies don't function this way. Like systematically, this is the wrong way to do it. Like if you just lit everything on fire and let fire take everything over, that's bad. You need the balancing components. And I think this is the lesson, hopefully we're going to learn this century, is that like we have to create sustainable cycles, because that's how it works anyway, right? So what do we have to do to realize that all the power with one or two people is bad, and all the power with like a huge group of the masses is also bad, right? Because we like to try to narrow it down to already tried out governmental systems like socialism, communism, Marxism, fascism. Pick one. Those are all extreme systems. They all swing the pendulum in one direction or the other. And that's literally the thing as a coach that I'm working on with my clients all the time is like, stop the black or white thinking. There's a spectrum of options here. So maybe we need to take a little bit from socialism and a little bit from the benevolent dictator model and a little bit from the Native Americans who already had a pretty decent system going for keeping the planet healthy, right? Like there's tools around us everywhere that we can be using if we stop polarizing ourselves.
Well, I thought that was what the American government structure was supposed to do. Don't you have the president in lieu of a monarch, the judiciary in lieu of something, the House of Representatives for the common people, the Congress or wherever the senator said. I don't know. Clearly, I know a whole bunch about how the U.S. government functions, but what I'm trying to say is, right, you have this piece over here that represents, maybe the aristocrats, this piece over here that represents the common people, this person over here, which is like a figurehead monarch, and then this person or this group of people over here, which represent, maintaining the laws of the country and so on. It was supposed to divide up the power so you don't get a concentration of it.
It was a representative government, aka a republic, which if you look at the longest standing civilizations, a lot of them were republics for this reason, because you balance the power out better, because you're representing more of the population and the different people in it, right? So that's a balanced-ish system. Just haven't gotten it right yet. Because you said, the structures in place. It's not impervious to corruption is the problem.
Lobbyists.
In this case, in this iteration of the cycle, right? You want to go all fantasy geek? There's like the Wheel of Time. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills. It's the new series out on Amazon if you haven't seen it.
So how do you get, because there's you think about like there's for example pharmaceutical interest, and this is not me trying to necessarily knock or tear apart the pharmaceutical industry, because there's been some incredible innovations that have come out of it, but on the same token, once again, you've got a concentration of wealth and power and influencing laws, and where are the checks and balances here?
Well, okay, there are none.
Totally, right?
Let me give you an example. Did you get that fly, by the way? Is there a fly?
No, it is totally a fly. My cat is coming, though. My cat he's seen it now, so it's not long for this world. Don't worry.
Oh my God, you're so well spoken.
What was it he said at the beginning? I was like the magical something. That's what I was doing.
Yes.
You're the wizard.
And you're so well spoken. You're so well spoken, even like trying to catch this thing.
I've been in this chair a while. I've got to wiggle something,
Procter and Gamble. I don't know if you guys saw this. Procter and Gamble just took off many of their products off the shelves, and they said they voluntarily did, which is a lie, by the way. Procter and Gamble had willingly put benzene, which is a carcinogenic, which causes cancer, into their air sprays, their sprays for deodorant, their sunscreens, their lotions for years. And they finally, on November 23rd, voluntarily took them off the market. How nice. And no, this is the point. Their Procter and Gamble stock didn't go down 1 penny.
Nope.
Not 1 penny. Now, the amount of people who are going to have cancer because of those products is going to be so enormous. Their stock didn't move 1 penny. I mean, why didn't all of us not dump every bit of their stock? Because we live in a world that reveres money. They don't care about the people that are going to die from this chemical that has been a known carcinogenic for years. Yeah. It's disgusting.
What was that book? I know we're all old enough, or at least some of us might be old enough to have had
I know what you're talking about.
That book in high school.
I know what you're talking about.
It wasn't Animal Farm. What was it?
Oh, not Lord of the Flies.
No. It's about
no.
It
was
something like Orwell, A Brave New World.
Oh my God!
I know what you're talking about.
All messed up, but it was what prompted FDR to put in all the regulations on the meatpacking industry, because it highlighted what was actually going on in the industry, and people were getting killed, and it was like really unsanitary, and lots of people were getting sick from the meat. What the heck was the name of it?
How about the guy that did the McDonald's for 30 days? That was pretty extraordinary.
Morgan Spurlock and Supersize Me.
Exactly. Supersize Me. Yeah.
But now, to be fair, there was somebody else who did that same thing, but did it a little bit differently and showed you could be reasonably healthy. But there's also, and this isn't too.
What is healthy?
We're not going to promote that one.
Oh, that's a whole nother couple of hours, Caitlin.
Yeah, I know. And the irony of, I don't want to say it. The irony of a health pass to get a McDonald's. But anyways, there, I said it. But I don't know.
She's
I
going for the. She's going.
I'm getting
for
the
it.
cat.
Oh,
to
the
get
cat.
Sorry.
I love it.
Well, this is real life, right? And so, and I think
real
it's like
life.
now that we're like getting comfortable with each other, now we're like now the personalities we're like, all right, now we're gonna like let fly here.
Here it is.
Get it.
We
But,
definitely have to do
we
this
missed it.
again when like I can get on at the right time and my internet doesn't go crazy and like this is good. We got a good team here. Everybody's
Yeah.
so well spoken.
Definitely.
And
This has
everybody
been a really
knows
good
their
time.
stuff. Like every person knows their stuff.
Yeah.
So
Which
nice.
is why we're doing this, to
Refreshing.
be fair, because we, especially in the world today, it's a lot
Yes.
harder to create environments where people can collaborate effectively, because this is literally what I was saying about the solution to the problem is having these checks and balances and these collaborations with cats.
Which is like,
I saw Caitlin's cats earlier again too. So
I saw Caitlin's cat too. Yeah.
but that's exactly what we're trying to do. Like Chris and I came
No, this
together
is working.
and
This is working.
I've dragged Caitlin into the mix. Not really dragged. I'm like, but I was like, we need a gut health specialist here as well. And
Yeah. No, she's great. All of them. Yeah.
Though, because we need to have these discussions, because we want to raise awareness. Like you have a degree of power and autonomy, individually, but like collectively, how do you start breaking down some of these structures? It's like you have to come together and talk about this. We have to create awareness and education, but we have to create it in a way that people actually want to consume. Because I say like in like say the health, like Caitlin, Chris, and I, we're all coaches in this industry. We're not in competition with each other. We're in competition with Netflix and Snickers, or Doritos or Mountain Dew. Like that's who we're in competition with, because they're hijacking our brains, right?
Or even the fitness snacks.
Another food, and that's another 6 to 7 hours of me ranting, if you want to have a rant about that.
People get mad when you tell them they're healthy fitness snacks.
Oh, they're Quest bars. Caitlin, you and I should have a conversation about Quest bars and gut health. Ready? Go.
Yeah.
I think people are receptive to conversations that are intellectual, and people have the facts and they have the expertise. All of us have that. So we don't get on here and go, oh, well, so-and-so company and, screw them or whatever. We're not like pointing fingers. We're just being logical and factual.
And solution focused. Like there are solutions here. There's stuff we can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's systemic issues we have that we may not personally be able to affect, but there's absolutely personal choices we can be making to nudge things in a direction that's better. John and I have been talking about this model for expansive change, and it starts with yourself. Right. And it's really interesting. I saw this TikTok the other day, and it was this guy he had 3 concentric circles, much like our concentric circle model that we were building. But it was the idea that you're building your life backwards if you start with have. And I wish I had I want a whiteboard now so I can just be like,
I love that.
Yeah.
But it's like you start in the center with have, and then it's do, and then you figure out who you are based on what you have and what you're doing. And he says it's backwards. You should figure out who you want to be and be that person, and then do the things that person would do, and then you will have the things that that person will have. And so you flip it on your head. It's really flipping the capitalist model on its head of saying, like, actually all of these accolades and all of this achievement is not who I am. I need to figure out who I am first and then build from there. And I think it's a really important like kind of cultural shift we need to try to generate. And this is what we're committed to doing, is saying, no, actually, I do have power to affect change, and I do have power to improve my health and do the right things for me and my family and those around me, even if I exist in a difficult environment. There's something I can do.
Well, what's really interesting is Christine, you went through this when you were basically confronted with your mortality and the sort of anger that you said you felt. And I'm opening the door for you to share a bit about this rather than me telling your story. But when you discovered, in a sense, you didn't really know who you were, and now you're faced with, like, you might have, you have a finite amount of time to live that's a lot shorter than you thought.
Right. I mean, I was pushed against the wall to really figure out who I was, because for the longest time I was just going, the way everybody thought I should go, but not introspectively trying to figure out who I was and what was my goal for life. Right. And when you're faced with a diagnosis and a doctor says to you, this is your percentile chance of survival at 41, you're like, holy shit, like, what have I done for 41 years? And if I'm able to live through this chemotherapy, what do I want to do moving forward? It's a really difficult time to go through that. obviously from a physical and emotional perspective, but it's also, you have a lot of downtime when you're sick from chemotherapy, when you're sitting in bed making choices of what you're going to listen to. And all day long, I could listen to the voice saying, you're not good enough. Everything that you had, your value is gone, and all those things. Or I could say to myself, okay, that person didn't work. Let's figure out a new way going forward in the hopes that you're going to survive. And I started to figure out who I was, and who I was somebody that wanted to serve, somebody that wanted to give hope to other people. Now, I could have gotten stuck in the materialism that I coveted for so long, or the external beauty that I had. And I just was like, that didn't work for me. I was lonely. It didn't feel good. Something was missing. And I think what was missing was that serving. And so since my diagnosis, it's been 10 years and 8 years cancer free today. But
I almost want to sing happy birthday or something like that, because it's like the rebirth of Christine,
Yeah. But I think that, a lot of people go in the wrong direction, and they take all that pain and all that suffering and get bitter and have unforgiveness, like to that doctor. But I don't want to have unforgiveness to that doctor, because then he controls me. So I don't want him to have any more control of my life than he already had. And so my decisions moving forward, all we have is our reaction, right? That's it. How we react to trauma, how we react to pain, how do we react to the diagnosis? And my reaction was, I'm not going to give away my power anymore. I'm going to figure out who I am, and whatever that looks like, I'm going to do that moving forward, because I have to find some joy in my life. And finding joy for me was sharing my story and helping other people figure out their joy, and teaching people how critical self-esteem is. Because the decisions that I made, especially with this doctor who bullied me, those decisions were based from a place in my life where I had no self-esteem. I was allowing that man to bully me. On some level, I have to take some responsibility for that. So I had to build my self-esteem up enough, right, to make a new life for myself, to not allow people in my life like that. And I think when you're pushed against the wall, like I was, you either go in one direction or you go in the other.
Yeah, you find out who you are. And I think that's the key of what you were just saying. It's really amazing. I think you're an amazing person. And I love that you're out there telling your story the way that you are. I think it's super empowering for people, because this is where people get their courage from, is they find someone or a story they can understand and relate to, and they go, okay, I can do it too. That's just so human. It's so beautiful, like it's just really,
if she can do it, I can do it.
It's the best thing. Yeah.
We're like story making machines. Well, I mean, you'd like to call us a meat machine in a skin suit, but that's Chris's terminology. But we're story making computers, in a sense, in our brain. That's how we cultivate a sense of meaning to what happens to us, as we create a story around that. And so we read ourselves into the stories of other people. So choosing, someone who was struggling with cancer might choose to read themselves into your story. And this is what gives me hope. And that's why each one of us shares our stories. And in the mentorship that I do, I really try to help other coaches that I mentor too, to bring out your story, bring that human element, because this is where we can create change.
It's the authenticity, right? Because that's how
like real authenticity. It sounds weird to say like real authenticity versus like hashtag influencer authenticity.
Yeah, but this is another response to the mistrust of the system, right? We now have influencers. We don't have media people. We have influencers, right? Who are catching our attention and inspiring us to do something. And I think this is why this is so important. This work that we're trying to all do in our own ways is that if there are going to be people out there who are influencing, they need to be people who are hopefully doing things for the right reasons. Yeah, from a place of service, like you say.
Yeah,
I love that. I think it's a really, clearly we're going to have to have this conversation again, or something around it. Because I mean, as each one of us talks, I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's so many rabbit holes my brain wants to go down. So we're definitely going to do this again. But if to bring it home, it's like, if you wanted to give somebody one digestible nugget sort of to take away from what we've been talking about today, what would it be?
I mean, I would say be your best advocate, but you can't be your best advocate if you've built your self-esteem on sand, right? You have to build your self-esteem and build your self-talk on solid ground, whatever that looks like to you. And once you have a solid self-esteem, you can make decisions with doctors or in life with peers or in a job or in relationally. that are gonna help you, right? Not just being pushed around by other people. You got to have a solid self-esteem.
Love that. Thank you. I want to build on that and say part of being your best advocate is advocating for the help you need. Not, fighting for yourself doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an isolated island that's you against, but it's like being willing to say, I need this help, and putting yourself in that, being an advocate in a vulnerable place as well. So that's what I'd like to add to that thought.
I don't have anything to add. I think that was perfect. That summed it up really nicely. How about you, Caitlin?
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Ditto. There we go. Awesome.
Well,
we'll
thank
definitely
you
do
guys
this
for your
again.
patience with my computer battles tonight. Please invite me back. Please.
Absolutely.
I loved it. You guys all of you, Chris, and Caitlin, and I already know you are such a wonderful speaker, but you both are so well spoken. So thank you. It's a privilege to be on this panel with you. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Christine.